Hey guys, tonight we're taking a sleepy stroll into something utterly mundane, but secretly delightful, the slightly complicated etiquette of Persian slippers. Picture this, you're standing in a sun-warmed courtyard of a grand old Persian home, the tile under your bare feet cool like porcelain, and right there at the threshold is a neat line of slippers, not shoes, not sandals, slippers. Some are velvet, some are embroidered. One pair looks suspiciously like it's made of camel felt. You're not allowed to go a step further unless you slide into the correct pair. Pick the wrong ones. You'll offend someone's grandmother, disgrace your host, and possibly bring shame upon your entire family. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You move slowly toward the doorway, sensing the age of the place. How even the wind hushes as it slips between lattice screens. Inside, cool shadows drape across tiled floors like old silk. But you don't cross the threshold. Not yet. You pause, noticing the shoes neatly abandoned by others. You're expected to do the same, of course. Yet, unlike the Western habit of slinging shoes into a pile, here the arrangement is ceremonial. Pointed toes always face out. Soles must never show. And God forbid your heels leave a smear on the sacred threshold marble. There's a pair just for you, worn, but not too much. Muted blue with a subtle gold pattern. They don't have a left or right, not really, but you'll still get it wrong. The insides are lined with fabric that smells faintly of rosewater and cedar. You slide your foot in slowly, trying not to wrinkle the lining. A breeze brushes your neck. Someone coughs delicately behind a curtain. You're being watched. See? Persian slipper etiquette is like that friend who never tells you they're mad. You're just supposed to know. Historians still argue whether these customs began in Zoroastrian temples or from much older tribal rituals. What they do agree on is this: slippers are a boundary marker. Cross the threshold with them, and you're a guest. Do it without them, or with the wrong ones, and you're either family or an intruder. They were practical, yes. Made to keep floors clean and souls humble. But they were also full of nuance. For example, some homes kept geesed pairs at the ready. These were plain, undecorated, and usually smelled like they'd been aired out once per dynasty. Wearing these meant you were either unexpected or not important enough to have your own assigned pair. If someone handed you the green pair with the embroidered lemons, however, it meant they'd remembered your last visit and that you liked lemons. Kind of sweet or creepy. The etiquette got even stranger during events. Imagine you're invited to a poetry night. You enter, remove your shoes, and slip into your designated pair. But someone else, a higher-ranking guest, arrives late. Suddenly, your slippers are too good for you. An attendant silently swaps them while you sip mint tea. You look down an hour later and, what do you know? You're now wearing a faded pair that smells like someone's uncle. Welcome to the hierarchy. And yet, slippers weren't just about human relationships. They were a direct line to the divine. In some Sufi traditions, disciples removed their shoes and donned specific slippers before entering teaching halls, symbolizing spiritual humility. There's even an old belief that demons can enter through unclean soles, which is a great excuse for never wearing your garden slippers inside. Here's your first fringe tidbit. There's evidence some slippers were filled with herbs like lavender, saffron, or crushed mint. Not for scent, but to keep insects out, or so they claimed. Honestly, some scholars believe it was just one upmanship in the olfactory department. Oh, your slippers smell like nothing. Mine whisper the secrets of spring. One 13th century text even describes a host who had a rotating wheel of guest slippers, literally a wooden turntable, like a lazy Susan of footwear. The The text doesn't mention whether guests spun it themselves, or if a servant gave it a ceremonious turn. Either way, I want one. By now, your borrowed slippers are snug. Not tight, not loose. Just right. You shuffle gently into the house, careful not to scuff the tile. Every movement is quiet. Your feet make soft hushing sounds, like waves nudging a pebbled shore. There's a cushion waiting in the corner. Tea is already steeping. Someone plucks a stringed instrument nearby. And you're starting to understand why slipper etiquette mattered. It wasn't just a rule. It was a language. And here's your final reality check. You'll probably forget these rules by morning. That's okay. Slippers forgive a lot, unless you wear them outside. Then all bets are off. You've settled into the corner cushion now, the tea warm in your hand, and your toes curling luxuriously inside those slightly, too, soft Persian slippers. The hush of the room gives you time to think, where did these peculiar foot, hugging things even come from? Not just the etiquette, but the object itself. Because while the rules around them might have been polished and refined over centuries, the slipper, as a concept, is practically ancient. You lean back slightly, eyes tracing the blue, glazed patterns on the wall, and your thoughts stretch back, way, way back, toward dusty cities and sun-baked courtyards where the idea of soft indoor footwear began to take shape. Persian civilization, with its endless scroll of dynasties, left its footprints all over history. And among those footprints were slippers. Archaeologists still argue whether the earliest versions showed up in Elamite households or among the Median nobility. What's agreed upon is that by the time the Achaemenid Empire started building terraced palaces at places like Persepolis, the idea of a non-outdoor shoe was already fashionable. Slippers were functional symbols, keeping grime off polished stone floors, sure, but also marking status. If you didn't work outside, if your job didn't require boots or sandals, then you wore slippers. Indoor, only footwear meant you had indoor, only problems, like political scheming, marriage alliances, and deciding which type of fig was best served at dinner. These early slippers weren't always elegant. Some looked like sad little sacks for your feet. Others had rigid felt soles and wide, clunky toes. But the moment you stepped into one, you were stepping into a kind of private world. Ancient inscriptions suggest they were commonly worn during storytelling, dining prayer, and always when visiting someone of a higher social rank. You didn't just show up in bare feet. That was for peasants and gods, depending on who you asked. And of course, materials mattered. Wool, felt, leather, and later, cotton and silk were all used, each carrying its own baggage of meaning. Wool was humble, maybe even virtuous. Silk? A show-off move. Leather, depending on the dye, meant you were either tasteful or trying too hard. Historians still debate whether certain designs were reserved for priests or just trendy among aristocrats with too much time on their hands. Now here's your quirky tidbit. Some slippers were designed never to leave a single footprint. Yes, they had intentionally smooth soles, meant to slide over tile without leaving any mark. The idea was that the best guests were like gentle breezes, felt but never seen. There's even a legend of a royal librarian who wore slippers made from pages of old poetry, because apparently walking on verse helped him remember it, or he just had a flair for the dramatic. By the time of the Sasanian Empire, things got more organized, and as usual, more bureaucratic. Slippers were categorized. You had temple slippers, guest slippers, morning slippers, and yes, even slippers for certain holidays. Ever heard of Nora's toast? That's the phrase for when your feet get too warm in ceremonial footwear because the fire dance is taking too long. Not common anymore, but still a great excuse to kick them off. You sip your tea again and suddenly notice how quiet your slippers have made you. That was the point. Persian slippers were soft, sold for a reason, so you could move without sound. In bustling noble homes where privacy was scarce, this mattered. You didn't announce your arrival with clomping boots. You ghosted in, whisper-footed. And here's a mainstream fact to tuck under your metaphorical pillow. Persian slipper customs eventually spread westward, influencing everything from Byzantine court shoes to early Ottoman harem footwear. The concept of the indoor-only shoe, elegant yet functional, traveled along trade routes and found new homes in palaces, mansions, and even monasteries, though none carried quite the same intricate rulebook. In your peripheral vision, an attendant appears, silently of course, and places a second pair of slippers nearby. These are different, narrower, plum-colored, lined with rabbit fur. They're not for you. They're a signal. Someone important is about to arrive. And that's part of the whole Persian slipper dance. Their visibility. Unlike shoes, which are discarded outside, slippers are shown off indoors. Left at doorways, tucked beside cushions, or arranged beneath prayer rugs. They're props in the theater of polite life. And every detail, from curve to color, speaks. The etiquette isn't just about not scuffing the floor. It's about stepping into a performance. A kind of everyday stage play where everyone knows their cues. Wear a velvet slipper means welcome, and a faded cotton one might say, sit by the wall. Where who you are determines what your feet wear, and where they're allowed to go. Now you stretch your legs slightly, feeling the floor beneath you. Smooth, cool, forgiving, and your slippers, these humble little foot potches, suddenly seem like historical relics in their own right. You didn't just slip into footwear. You slipped into a role. The hush that falls when someone truly important enters the room is different. It's heavier. A pause in the air, as if even the rugs hold their breath, and then you hear it, the softest whisper of movement. Not the voice, not the rustle of silk robes, but the gentle brush of slippers on tile. You turn slightly, careful not to overstep your cushion's edge. She glides in, older, elegant, eyebrows like hawk wings, and you instinctively glance at her feet. Plum velvet, just like the ones you were warned about. Gold thread in tight, deliberate spirals, curling at the toes like question marks. These aren't just slippers. They are declarations. This is the part where you learn that in 10th century Persia, slippers were your summe, your biography, and your family tree, all stitched together with absurd precision. The deeper the embroidery, the higher the rank. Toe shape, heel height, number of decorative beads, all encoded messages. You shift in your seat, suddenly aware of the blue and gold pair you're wearing. They're comfortable, respectable, but not royal, not even court adjacent. More like house guest with decent table manners. Tier. And now that you've seen hers, you feel underdressed from the ankles down. This wasn't just about vanity. It was a finely tuned system of social signaling. Historians still argue whether specific colors were restricted by law or simply enforced by centuries of side-eye. You wore saffron if you were a scholar, emerald if you were tied to the clergy. Crimson was a minefield noble in one region, scandalous in another. And white, that was a funeral thing. Never wear white slippers to a birthday. Unless you're trying to start something. There are even records of noble families patenting their slipper designs. Literally, designs so unique, so carefully guarded, that making a knockoff could get you banned from court gatherings. Imagine slipper copyright wars, but with more embroidery and less cease and desist. And now, a bit of slipper trivia that's oddly delightful. Among aristocratic women, there was a popular practice of hiding tiny charms inside the slipper lining. Miniature talismans, silver crescents, jade fish, or even dried rose petals that were believed to protect the wearer's reputation or soften gossip whispered behind fans. Basically, magical foot insurance. Some ladies even had their names stitched on the inner arch, just in case they were removed during, say, an impromptu poetry duel or fainting spell. You watch the woman settle onto a raised dais. No one dares sit beside her. Her slippers are displayed just enough to catch the candlelight. No scuffs, no creases, just the slight gleam of perfectly worn immobility. Her feet don't fidget. They float. It makes you think. What did these slippers say before they were embroidered? Before they meant anything? At what point did someone say, you know what would really complete this dinner party? Coordinated footwear. One fringe detail tucked in the folds of time. Some court advisors were reportedly tasked with monitoring footwear politics. If a rival arrived in overly extravagant slippers, it was a subtle challenge, a battle of status, fought in silk and thread instead of swords. An advisor might discreetly note the offense, and the following week, your host would mysteriously acquire an even grander pair, passive, aggressive revenge with tassels. Of course, these unspoken rules applied differently to men and women. Men's slippers were often muted. Earth tones, stern patterns, durable soles. They still whispered status, but more like an uncle who refuses to say, I love you, out loud. Women's footwear, on the other hand, spoke in full poetry. You could chart a woman's entire rise in court politics by the complexity of her slipper stitching. And then there was slipper gossip, a known pastime in noble circles, where women gathered to embroider and quietly shred reputations over misaligned seams or a poorly chosen heel fabric. Did you see Fateme's guest pair? Worn at the toe, and at a music recital, no less. Q gasps. This whole social ballot might sound exhausting, and it was, but it was also grounding. The rituals gave structure to chaos. Everyone knew the roles. You didn't have to guess what someone meant when they wore indigo slippers with peacock feather embroidery. It meant they were fabulous and dangerously connected. You glance again at your own pair. Maybe not fabulous. Definitely not dangerous. But still comfortable and clean. That counts for something. The woman speaks at last, her voice low and clipped. People lean in. You don't understand her words, but the room's reaction tells you everything. Laughter, then silence. You catch just enough to realize she's telling a story about someone who wore mismatched slippers to a royal engagement. Tragic. Probably fictional. Or exaggerated. Still, no one wants to be that person. So, you sit straighter. You cross your ankles just so, and you start to understand how a slipper isn't just what you wear. It's how you walk, how you sit, how you present your entire self in a society that notices everything. Even the things beneath the hem of your robe. You're invited deeper now, past the lattice screens, and into a corridor lined with softly flickering lanterns. The walls narrow slightly, muffling every sound, until your footsteps are practically non-existent. It feels like walking through a sigh. And that's very much the point. You're entering the harem halls, not the scandalous fantasy version with golden pools and grapes on silver platters. No, this is the real deal. A labyrinth of private quarters, quiet gardens, women's libraries and rooms where the politics of slippers might be even deadlier than the ones in court. Here, etiquette isn't just about being polite. It's survival, dressed in satin. You pause before a threshold marked with a delicate arch. Before stepping inside, you do a quick slipper check. Still on, still clean, still quiet. Good, you've passed the first test. Because here in the women's quarters, every shuffle, every footfall speaks volumes. The air smells like rosewater and cardamom. Somewhere, a fountain trickles, and you catch sight of a circle of women seated on velvet cushions, passing around a silver tray of sugared almonds. But what draws your eye are the slippers, scattered like flower petals around the gathering, each pair placed intentionally, some lined up with military precision. Others set slightly askew, as if abandoned in a hurry. It's not random. In harem culture, especially among the elite Safavid and later Qajar dynasties, slippers weren't just about decorum. They were signals. A pair left pointed toward a particular doorway, an invitation. A pair turned sideways beside a bedroom curtain, privacy requested. And two pairs, identical, side by side, meant gossip was being shared, and you were not invited. Historians still debate whether these codes were universal or varied household to household. Some suggest they originated from earlier Zoroastrian purity customs. Others argue they were clever innovations by women seeking autonomy in spaces built to contain them. What we do know is this silence mattered. The soft sole of a Persian slipper wasn't an accident. It allowed women to move unseen and unheard. Power, after all, thrives in quiet. You didn't announce your presence. You arrived. And if someone heard you coming, you were already doing it wrong. You ease into the room. The conversation continues without skipping a beat, but one woman gives you a side glance. Not a glare, exactly. Just enough to make you second guess your slipper choice. Are blue and gold too masculine here? Should you have switched to something embroidered in floral silks? Do these people notice your arch support? One fringe detail floats to mind. Some harem slippers were made with slightly uneven soles on purpose. The idea was that the wearer would feel off balance unless they moved slowly and deliberately. A training tool for elegance. You couldn't rush in those things unless you wanted to trip over your own intrigue. The women around you sip tea and whisper. Laughter rises and fades like waves, and all the while, their slippers lie in plain sight. Passive, quiet, perfectly revealing. One pair is adorned with tiny moon-shaped bells. Not enough to jingle when walking, but just enough to chime when removed. A subtle way of announcing presence without ever raising your voice. And here's your mainstream fact. Many high-ranking women in Persian courts had their own personal slipper attendants. Not just to fetch or clean them, but to memorize who had worn which pair, and what message each placement conveyed. A kind of sartorial secretary. If a guest tried to signal interest in a powerful, alley-through slipper arrangement, the attendant would discreetly reposition them, slightly wrong, to signal disapproval. Slipper sabotage. You catch movement at the edge of the room. A girl no older than 12 glides in and kneels beside a much older woman, whispering something you don't hear. The elder nods. The girl stands and, still in her slippers, disappears through a side door, fast but noiseless. A reminder that even in youth, slipper discipline is drilled in early. One curious tidbit, some slippers doubled as record-keeping. No, really. In a few households, especially those with strong poetic traditions, slippers were inscribed, tiny inked verses along the inside arch, chronicling milestones. A birth, a secret promise, a piece of gossip so juicy it deserved a footnote. Literally. Now you shift your feet again, and one of the women gestures toward a servant. A fresh pair of slippers is brought over for you. These are lighter, thinner, indoor slippers, if that makes sense. The kind reserved for storytelling sessions or quiet games played with carved bone dice. You change into them, awkwardly at first, trying not to expose the soles of your feet. Another harem fox paths. Always slide one out, then the other. Never stand barefoot. That's for punishment chambers or unfortunate portraits. With your new slippers snug, you're ushered into a smaller adjoining room. Fewer people. More cushions. One woman is tuning a setar. Another is arranging flower petals into a float-in design in a shallow brass bowl. You're invited to sit, no words exchanged. Just a nod. The slippers you now wear say you belong, at least for the evening. And as the music begins, you feel it, that subtle transformation. You're not just a guest anymore. You've been absorbed into the hush. The harem slipper ritual has accepted you, if only provisionally. Don't mess it up. You wake to the sound of water dripping, slow, rhythmic, almost deliberate. Somewhere nearby, the courtyard fountain has decided to practice its percussion skills. You're still nestled among cushions, half covered by a silk throw, slippers neatly set at your feet like loyal little sentinels. It's early morning, and something in the air has shifted. Lighter, cleaner. The harem has gone quiet. That's your cue. A young attendant gestures for you to follow, and you do, carefully, softly, your indoor slippers padding silently as you move down a mosaic, tiled hallway. At the far end waits a small domed vestibule. You recognize it before you even step inside a prayer room. Smaller than the ones you've seen in mosques, but just as sacred. And this is where it gets complicated. Slippers at prayer are a paradox wrapped in cloth. On one hand, Persian slipper etiquette demands modesty, cleanliness, reverence. On the other, the Islamic tradition, rooted in the broader customs of the region, insists on bare feet during worship. No dirt between you and the divine, no barrier on holy ground. So you stop at the door, so do your slippers. But here's the twist. You can't just take them off any old way. There's a whole ritual. You bow slightly, not too much, just enough to show respect. You reach down, never bending from the waist. That's considered casual to the point of disrespect. And slip out of your footwear. Slippers must be placed side by side, facing away from the prayer space, never toward it. The soles must not be visible to the room, and you absolutely do not toss them aside or, heaven forbid, place them upside down. That's considered a direct affront, not just to the people present, but to the divine. Historians still argue whether these customs are more religious, social, or architectural in origin. Some claim they began with early Zoroastrian temple designs, where footwear was forbidden past the sacred fire line. Others say it's purely Islamic jurisprudence layered with Persian hospitality customs. Either way, the result is the same one misstep, and you might offend more than just your host. You kneel. The prayer begins, and you feel oddly lighter, not just physically, but spiritually, as though leaving your slippers behind at the threshold somehow released more than just the dust on your soles. You understand now why they matter so much, why they're part of every meaningful entrance and every graceful exit. When the prayer ends, you return to your slippers. Another rule, never put them on standing up. You sit carefully and slide your feet in. Smooth, silent, secure. Then it's time for the mosque. The main mosque is just down the street, massive, ancient, echoing with quiet echoes and the scent of sandalwood. And outside its marble entrance is a shoe chaos so precise it might as well be choreography. Men and women alike remove their outdoor shoes, but the slippers get their own special treatment. Most people carry them in a cloth bag, not because they're valuable, but because they're respectful. You're expected to place them just inside the entrance courtyard. Not in the prayer hall, but not outside either. Like diplomatic envoys, they hover in the transitional space between profane and sacred. Some mosques even employ a slipper attendant, a professional, usually elderly, who sits at a small wooden bench and nods approvingly when you place your pair correctly. One mainstream fact, during the height of the Safavid era, the largest mosques in Isfahan had full-time slipper librarians who would catalog and organize the footwear of prominent worshippers. Your social status determined how close your slippers were placed to the inner hall. Closer meant cleaner, and more important. Now here's a quirky detail. Certain Sufi mystics developed a habit of placing one slipper atop the other, heel over toe, forming a symbolic arch. It was meant to represent humility and the passage from the material to the spiritual. Over time, this little stack became a mini trend, then a topic of argument, then something so common that even people who had no idea why they did it still mimicked the gesture. As you walk through the mosque's side garden, your slippers whisper against the cool stone. The ground is swept clean every morning, so there's no dirt, just early dew clinging to the marble like it doesn't want to evaporate. You pass a row of columns where two elderly men argue in low voices about someone's recent breach of slipper etiquette. He placed them with the toes inward. One mutters, "An accident." The other suggests, "No." The first sighs. "He did it last month too. It's a message. A message. About slippers." You suppress a grin. It's absurd and entirely believable. And now you find yourself in a side chamber. Dimly lit. Sparse. Just cushions, a low wooden bench, and a single niche holding a dusty book. This is a madrasa annex, once used by scholars to discuss theology, law and yes, etiquette. A low shelf holds abandoned pairs of old slippers, dusty, cracked, but arranged with reverence. One pair is laced with copper thread. Another looks like it was repaired with the edge of a scroll. Each pair has a story. Each one stood at the edge of a holy conversation and waited patiently, soaking in centuries of whispered debates. You take a moment to add yours, placing your slippers beside them just for a moment. A quiet offering to the odd, sacred, slightly fussy lineage of Persian slipper rules. And then you step away barefoot, just a few inches. But oh, how light you feel. Back in the city proper, the mood shifts. Gone is the hush of the mosque, replaced by a new kind of music. The chatter of merchants, the clatter of spice jars, the occasional goat with questionable boundaries. You're entering the heart of it, all the bazaar. And here, in a crooked alleyway smelling faintly of cinnamon, wool, and something definitely unregulated, is where the slippers are born. You duck under a canvas awning and find yourself in a shoemaker's quarter, a narrow corridor of open workshops where cobblers, dyers, and tanners perform their delicate dance. The air is thick with the scent of wet leather and old tea. Somewhere nearby, a cat naps in a pile of discarded insoles. You step carefully. This isn't a place for wandering barefoot. The floor is a mosaic of dropped needles, dye stains, and sticky patches of mysterious origin. Your slippers, still soft from mosque marble, are definitely out of their depth. One craftsman glances at your feet and chuckles. "West," he says knowingly. "You'll need sturdier soles in here." Welcome to the source. This is where Persian slippers begin their journey. From hide to heel, from imagination to embroidery. The process is oddly poetic. First, raw leather arrives from nearby tanneries, having been soaked in oak bark and river mud for days. Then it's dried, scraped, and softened. This part smells like something your nose will regret for the rest of the day. Next comes the dyeing. Enormous pots bubble over open flames, filled with pomegranate skins, indigo leaves, saffron threads. Some dyers swear by beetroot, others use crushed insects, cochineal, for that perfect red. Historians still argue whether these ingredients were chosen for their symbolic meaning or because they just happen to stain the most permanently. And yes, here's your fringe tidbit: one popular blue hue, used exclusively for slippers meant to be worn at betrothal dinners, was made with ground up lapis lazuli, an outrageously expensive pigment normally reserved for royal manuscripts. A literal footnote in someone's engagement story. Once the fabric or leather is dyed, it passes to the slipper tailors. These are not your average cobblers. These are artisans with opinions, loud, frequent, and often about each other's stitching techniques. One prefers horsehair stuffing. Another uses wool mixed with crushed lavender for relaxation and fungus prevention. A third is loudly insisting that no proper slipper should be made without an inner arch cut from dried fig bark. You watch as one man hammers a curved toe into place using a mold shaped like a baby's fist. The toe curls upward, not out of fashion, but to avoid tripping on long robes. Practical elegance. He catches you watching and hands you a piece of thick felt. "Here," he says. "Smell." It smells like smoke, vinegar, and regret. Apparently, it's the secret to longevity. Slippers made with this felt last through 3 generations, or at least 2 wars and 1 dowry negotiation. You move further in, past embroiderers hunched over frames, threading impossible patterns with silk threads finer than spiderwebs. They whisper to each other in the kind of code only people who spend 12 hours a day staring at velvet can understand. One of them's added a motif you recognize, a tiny crescent moon. You saw it yesterday on a harem slipper. Coincidence? Or trend? A boy runs through the alley barefoot, dodging elbows and stray scraps of fabric. He pauses at a low shelf stacked with slippers, in progress, then is chased off by an irate apprentice wielding a measuring tape like a whip. The slipper, it turns out, is not a toy. It is a legacy item, a symbol, a trap for your soul if made improperly. You overhear an argument near a doorway, 2 craftsmen debating whether bells should be sewn inside the lining or outside the heel seam. Inside jingles too softly. One insists. Outside says you're showing off. The other replies, the compromise. One tiny bell hidden behind the left ankle, to be revealed only when seated. The socially acceptable flirtation bell, they call it. One mainstream fact to tuck away, many of these workshops were hereditary, passed from grandfather to father to reluctant son. Some families specialized in just one slipper element: heel shaping, tassel braiding, or the mystical art of sole softening. If your great uncle was the royal palace's preferred slipper, stretcher, congratulations. You'd never go barefoot again. You finally reach the end of the alley, where finished pairs are displayed like tiny thrones. Rows and rows of them, sorted not by size, but by social intent. There are slippers for mourning, for matchmaking, for festivals, for apology visits. One set is labeled, for diplomatic withdrawal, which sounds like something every awkward house guest should own. You spot a pair that catches your eye, deep green velvet with silver embroidery shaped like weeping cypress trees. The artisan notices your gaze. Softest heel in the bazaar, he says proudly. Stuffed with carded goat's wool and dried orange peel. Or polite exits. You try them on. They fit. But more than that, they speak. They whisper. You belong here now. And that really is what Persian slippers are all about. Not just comfort. Not just style. But storytelling, from the dye pot to your doorstep. You're still cradling your newly acquired green velvet slippers when the bazaar's tempo begins to slow. The sun sinks low, casting golden slats across the stall walls. Somewhere behind you, a merchant starts to pack away his spices with the same reverence you saw in the prayer chamber. Time in Persia doesn't end, it folds. And now, your next step is literal royalty. Someone you met earlier, her slippers whispered, important, not unkind, has invited you to visit the royal residence. Not the grand palace the tourists gawk at, but the living quarters behind it where actual feet tread and real gossip steams like saffron rice. You're escorted through a series of arched gates, each guarded by stone lions and men who don't smile. Eventually, you reach a room entirely floored in pale marble, polished to a mirror sheen. The walls, covered in tiny mirrored tiles, you feel multiplied. Very slippery, and very underdressed, even in your new green pair. Now here's the kicker. You don't get to wear your own slippers in the royal residence. No, there's a designated room where your slippers are respectfully removed, cleaned, and stored while you're issued a court pair. These are house slippers like you've never seen. Velvet, obviously. Embroidered with gold thread, of course. But it's the sole that grabs your attention. Leather softened so thoroughly it feels like walking on warm figs. Your guide, a man who speaks with the polished tone of someone who's never once stubbed his toe, explains, these are the Shah's approved pattern. Any deviation suggests rebellion, or worse, an influence from the West. See, during certain reigns, especially under the Qajar dynasty, royal slippers were standardized, down to thread count. You could tell who designed them by the curl of the toe alone. Some even bore official stamps inside the arch, like tiny bureaucratic tattoos. And here's a mainstream fact. Persian sultans weren't just fashion-forward. They were slipper-obsessed. Shah Abbas the Great reportedly changed his indoor slippers 5 times a day, choosing pairs to match the temperament of his meetings. Burgundy for diplomacy, gold for prayer, black velvet for family audiences. Apparently, even the soles carried messages. A particular stitched knot on the heel meant, speak truthfully, or trip. You glide silently into a reception chamber, lit by oil lamps suspended on silver chains. The floor is so clean it smells like citrus. People are seated on floor cushions, arranged by rank. And yes, you guessed it, rank is mostly measured in slipper embroidery. You spot them immediately. A pair of midnight, blue slippers with a gold funic stitched across both toes. Everyone avoids eye contact with their wearer. That's prints, level embroidery. You don't even sit near those. And then comes the story of the stolen design. Historians still argue which European royal first laid eyes on Persian court slippers and decided I must have this. Some say it was a Spanish ambassador in the 16th century. Others claim a French noblewoman smuggled out a pair in her bodice after a diplomatic dinner. Whatever the case, the result was a flurry of poorly copied versions flooding European courts. The slipper spread, first in drawings, then in fabric samples. Finally, in foppish attempts to recreate the soft-soled luxury using stiff European materials. The result? Gorgeous, impractical shoes that squeaked in corridors and made staircases dangerous. Entire reputations were built, or ruined, on these imported slipper trends. One curious tidbit: at least one European cobbler tried to recreate the famous Persian toe curl using a wax mold. It failed spectacularly in summer heat, resulting in slippers that sagged like overcooked noodles. Persians, meanwhile, took note of the flattery and rolled their eyes. Court scribes joked about foreigners who walk loud and learn slow. Still, some princes began adopting elements of French slipper fashion, like tiny embroidered initials or hidden heel pouches for carrying love notes. Fashion is a dialogue, even when it's passive-aggressive. Back in the chamber, someone claps softly. A musician begins to play, and small platters of fruit and nuts are passed around. You nibble politely, careful not to drop anything. Staining royal slippers is the kind of fox pass that makes it into poetry. You notice an older nobleman adjusting his pair. Scarlet velvet, with a row of silver medallions sewn into the arch. Each medallion represents a successful negotiation. These are his arrêt somme. He sees you looking and offers a nod, not quite a smile. His eyes say, "Earn your medals." The gathering ends with a quiet prayer, and attendants appear to help everyone slip back into their original pairs. Yours have been brushed and perfumed, somehow. You slide into them and feel a little different. Not taller, not louder, just more grounded. Like your feet remember the royalty beneath them now. You step back out into the darkening courtyard, the stars emerging above you like curious eyes. And somewhere inside, the prince's phoenix slippers rest. Watching. Waiting. Ready to make another appearance when the politics require a little flair. You don't expect to find revolution in a quiet drawing room, but that's the thing about Persian slippers. They're full of surprises. One moment they're just cozy foot hugs with ornamental stitching. The next, they're the center of a diplomatic scandal. Tonight, you're seated in a sunken room ringed with lanterns. The floor is warm from hidden coals beneath polished stone. You're surrounded by scholars and low-level nobility, all deep in discussion about land disputes, poetry, and, oddly enough, footwear. A particularly animated gentleman is ranting about the incident. You lean in. Apparently, someone wore the wrong slippers to the Shah's niece's engagement feast. Not just wrong in color or size, but in social message. They were deep indigo, embroidered with dragons, reserved only for the military elite. The man who wore them, a merchant's son. Now, this is more than a fox pass, this is defiance. He knew exactly what he was doing, someone whispers. A statement, a challenge, and this is where it gets spicy. Slipper protocol, while ancient and mostly polite, could be weaponized. A calculated breach of etiquette could carry real consequences. Exile, lost status, or, in rare cases, jail. Historians still argue whether the merchant's son did it to protest trade restrictions or just to impress a certain well-shod princess. Either way, it worked. He made headlines, or whatever passed for headlines, when headlines were inked on parchment and read aloud at bathhouses. Let's rewind a bit. Throughout Persian history, especially during the Qajar dynasty, public appearances were political theater. And just like actors have costumes, attendees had slippers. Specific kinds for specific gatherings, court dinners, poetry recitals, dowry negotiations. Wearing the wrong pair wasn't just awkward. It could be interpreted as subversive. Slippers became silent declarations of allegiance. Take, for example, the curious case of Prince Jalal, who showed up to a diplomatic meeting in plain wool slippers, while everyone else wore gold, threaded velvet. The message? I am not impressed. The fallout? An alliance was delayed 6 months. Slippers 1, foreign policy 0. There's even a record of a slipper duel. Not the kind with sabers. A subtle escalation between two rival nobles, each arriving at social events in increasingly elaborate pairs. It ended when one of them commissioned slippers stitched with actual pearls. He won, but also ruined his arches. Here's a quirky tidbit. A certain politician reportedly stored his slipper pairs in a locked cabinet labeled by intent. Labels included charms, moderate, outrage, and reconciliation, extra, soft. You start to realize that slipper protocol isn't just about fitting in, it's about playing the game. And the stakes? Often higher than you'd think. One mainstream fact during the early 18th century, Persian diplomats traveling to the Ottoman Empire were given strict footwear instructions. They were to wear slippers, not boots, inside any foreign chamber as a sign of cultural humility. In one incident, a diplomat's assistant forgot and wore stiff, soled shoes that echoed loudly in a tiled palace hall. The Ottoman host considered it an insult. Talks stalled for weeks. Back in the lantern-lit room, someone points to your slippers. Still the soft green velvet pair. A quiet compliment. You've chosen well, appropriate, respectful, non-threatening. The moment passes, but you catch a smirk from an older woman seated near the fire. Her slippers are crimson, with 2 silver birds stitched in flight across the toes. Not standard.
Not quiet.
Definitely a story there. She leans closer and says, I wore these to a tribunal once. They didn't dare question my testimony. You blink, that's either a joke or the most elegant courtroom power move in history. And then the room's mood changes. The conversation drifts into metaphor, as Persian gatherings often do. Slippers become symbols of integrity, of diplomacy, of rebellion. One scholar recites a couplet from a forgotten poet. He stepped with silk, but his soles left fire. Another quotes a satirical pamphlet. Trust not a man whose slippers squeak. His words will too. And just like that, you're watching history not in books, but in whispers and stitched fabric. The slipper is not just an accessory, it's a voice. So imagine, for a moment, the weight of stepping into a chamber knowing your feet will be analyzed as closely as your words. The pressure of needing to say something subversive without ever opening your mouth. The power of a dragon, stitched heel on the wrong man. Your feet shift slightly, and you feel the softness of your own soles. Not defiant, not revolutionary, but present, aware. Maybe that's enough for tonight. The morning light slides lazily across a stone threshold, pooling into a wide receiving room where servants are already laying cushions for the midday meal. You've been invited? Again? And this time, you're prepared. Almost. Because today isn't just about good manners or not knocking over a teacup. Today is about slipper choreography. You arrive early, guided by a steward whose eyebrows are so expressive they probably moonlight as semaphore flags. He leads you to a modest vestibule where you're invited to remove your slippers and switch into the guest set. Plain but pristine, lined with blue silk. They're not flashy. It's good. Flashy means you think too highly of yourself. These say, respectful, yet knows where the kitchen is. But now comes the real dance. Because here's the problem with Persian slipper etiquette at social gatherings. Everyone removes them. Everyone walks around. And eventually, no one remembers whose or whose. You step into the main chamber, where floor cushions form concentric half, moons around a low dining spread. You know from experience that your assigned seat will dictate your slipper position. When seated, your pair should be directly behind your left shoulder, neatly aligned, always. They drift. Someone will notice. And interpret guests start to arrive. Nobles, poets, a minor cleric with suspiciously shiny eyebrows. As they settle in, slippers are arranged around the room like chess pieces. Each move a coded signal. A slipper placed too close to the host's cushion might be read as presumptuous. Too far away. Disrespectful. One pair turned inwards toward a rival guest. Passive-aggressive warfare ensued. You glance around and realize there are at least 3 pairs that look identical to yours. Not good. These gatherings have rules, unspoken but ironclad, about accidentally wearing someone else's slippers. That's a disaster on the scale of double. Dipping your bread in saffron yogurt. Maybe worse. There's a servant whose job is literally slipper monitor. She drifts silently among the cushions, correcting pair positions with the delicacy of a cloud adjusting its own shadow. She stops at your pair, squints, and nudges them exactly 1 finger, width farther from your neighbor's cushion. You give her a grateful nod. She doesn't acknowledge it. Her work is sacred. Now here's a mainstream fact. In wealthier homes, custom slipper tokens were sewn into the soles, tiny beads or bits of colored thread, known only to the owner, like a family crest but underfoot. These were especially useful at dinner parties, where identity theft began at the ankles. Conversation swells around you. Food arrives. Pilaf, lamb stew, dried fruit laid out in absurdly symmetrical patterns. You're careful to keep your feet tucked politely beneath your robe. At one point, someone excuses themselves to the restroom and missteps, reaching for the wrong pair. A collective gasp. The slipper monitor appears instantly, like a summons direction maid. Crisis averted. Barely. Then, the host, a scholar with a voice like crushed velvet, begins telling a story about the great slipper swap of Tiberias, an infamous 17th century dinner party gone spectacularly wrong. According to legend, 2 rival merchants, identical slippers, accidentally left with each other's pair. By the time the mix-up was discovered, one had already entered a mosque, wearing another man's slippers in sacred space. Blasphemy by footwear. A duel nearly ensued. Cooler heads prevailed. A third man intervened with a new pair made from both sets, stitching them together, mismatched and ridiculous. He called them the slippers of peace. They're still displayed in a museum somewhere, preserved like sacred relics of slipper diplomacy. And now for your fringe tidbit certain households employed slipper servants, not just for retrieval, but for rotation. After each guest stood up or returned from the courtyard, their slippers were subtly warmed by the hearth and turned exactly 10 degrees outward. This wasn't a comfort measure, it was status signaling. Only people worth the extra turn were worth the fire. You finish your meal and rise, watching how others do the same. One woman pauses, eyes her slippers, then sighs. Someone's taken hers. A scandal. She doesn't shout, of course. She calmly requests assistance. The monitor begins triangulating guest positions like a general mapping a battlefield. Within moments, the correct pair is returned. All is well. You find your own pair, check twice, and slide your feet in. They're still warm, still soft, still yours. There's something deeply comforting about that. As you exit, someone behind you mutters, "See, that's the right way to leave." You don't look back, but your steps, silent and measured, leave an impression no one can trace. You're standing now in the kind of courtyard that architects dream about. White marble glowing under a late afternoon sun, smooth columns casting perfectly straight shadows, and not a single speck of dirt in sight. A pair of gardeners in loose tunics sweep invisible dust from the paths. Honestly, you suspect they're just keeping up appearances. But the real question isn't about the marble, it's about your feet. Slippers on, or off. That, dear listener, is the Persian etiquette version of a philosophical crisis. The indoor-outdoor slipper dilemma. Technically, you're still within the household. The courtyard is enclosed by high walls, has shaded arcades on all 4 sides, and features a central fountain with chirping finches, sipping delicately from its rim. But the ceiling? Open to the sky? Is it outside? You glance down at your slippers, soft, well-worn, with just enough cushion to make you feel smug. Traditionally, they're meant to be removed before stepping onto actual dirt or public space. But is marble, polished weekly, and guarded by barefoot gardeners, really public? This is where it gets tricky. Historians still argue about the origins of the threshold rule. Some say it dates back to early Zoroastrian customs, where stepping over a sacred line with shoes sullied by outdoor dust was taboo. Others claim it was just a very successful sanitary campaign by Persian matriarchs tired of sweeping the carpets. Either way, the rule was simple: slippers indoors only. Crossing into the outside meant removing them, unless the outside was cleaner than most people's bedrooms. There are recorded debates, even poems about this very thing. One courtier in the 18th century wrote a sonnet titled "On the Marble of the Courtyard," lamenting his confusion over where to remove his slippers during a romantic rendezvous. The final verse reads, "I left them near the jasmine pot, unsure if love is barefoot sought." So yes, even poets struggled with this. And that's your fringe tidbit. There was once a brief fashion of dual-purpose slippers with leather soles stitched onto silk uppers. Technically acceptable both indoors and out. They were called panjei duru, dual-soled toes. They didn't last long. Too slippery indoors, too soft for gravel paths, but a delightful failure nonetheless. You take a step across the threshold. No one gasps. You breathe again. And then you spot her, the matriarch of the household, seated beneath a pomegranate tree, sipping tea from a narrow porcelain cup. Her slippers, crimson with silver edging, are planted firmly on the marble. She sees your hesitation and smirks, then gently lifts one slipper and taps it against the column base. The message is clear. If the marble is cleaner than your conscience, you may proceed. You walk on, feeling the cool stone beneath your soles. Your slippers make the faintest whisper, like a secret being passed from one archway to another. The courtyard hosts no rugs, no cushions. Just benches and the hush of doves nesting in the roof beams. It's technically outside, but it feels like a dreamscape wrapped in rules that melt in the sun. One mainstream fact in elite Persian homes, courtyards were often considered neutral zones in terms of etiquette. Not fully indoor, not fully out. Guests were allowed to wear slippers there, but only if they came through an inner hall, not directly from the street. If you skipped the interior and walked in from the alley, your slippers were tainted. It's like food touching the wrong part of your plate. Suddenly offensive for reasons no one can explain. You settle onto a bench beneath an apricot tree, and a servant appears with a small bowl of chilled rosewater. He sets it down, then pauses to adjust your slippers, just slightly, to point outward. Why? So the matriarch knows you're not planning to stay too long. A subtle nod to her authority, and a sign that your presence is polite, not presumptive. It's all about thresholds. Not just literal doorsteps, but the invisible lines we learn not to cross. Between guest and family. Between modesty and pride. Between being welcome and overstaying. And slippers, strange as it sounds, help us navigate those lines. You're reminded of something a scholar said earlier in passing. A man may enter 100 homes, but his slippers speak first. Here, beneath the apricot branches, you finally understand. Your slippers, green velvet, slightly scuffed at the toe, have spoken quietly for you all along. And now, as the sun dips lower and the doves settle into sleep, you slip them off gently and rest your feet against the warm stone. No need to walk for a while. You've crossed enough thresholds today. You're back indoors, now tiptoeing across polished tile as if the floors are listening. The hallways are quieter this evening, tinged with incense, and the warm smell of dinner fading into memory. A soft hum of crickets leaks through the lattice windows. You're being led to the private quarters of the house's eldest daughter, Zahra, who is preparing her dowry chest. You weren't expecting slippers to make you emotional, but here we are. The room is dim, lit by a single oil lamp with an amber flame that flickers like it's whispering secrets. And before you, spread out on a tapestry, is a collection that could rival a small museum's exhibit: slippers in every color, fabric, and emotion. Some are new, stiff with pride. Others are old, softened by time and maybe tears. Zahra greets you with a nod, then returns to her work, folding garments, adjusting trinkets, and gently polishing a pair of navy slippers embroidered with tiny silver vines. They were her mother's. These, she says softly, were her wedding pair. She walked from her father's house in them. And just like that, the air thickens. You sit beside her as she continues unpacking memories in velvet and silk. The green ones were a childhood gift. The faded lilac pair, worn during a winter illness, so soft they barely touched the floor. The ones with fraying tassels, from the summer she first fell in love. With the wrong boy, she adds, rolling her eyes with affection and a twinge of regret. This is the secret life of Persian slippers. They don't just signal etiquette. They carry sentiment, like pressed flowers for your feet. In traditional households, a dowry chest didn't just include linens and jewelry. It included slippers, sometimes a dozen pairs or more. Slippers for visiting in-laws, for the first prayer as a married woman, for the birth of a child, for mourning, for negotiating peace with a nosy neighbor. Historians still argue whether these customs were more symbolic or practical. But Zahra doesn't seem to care. To her, they're memories with souls. Here's your mainstream fact: in 19th century Persia, slipper makers were often commissioned specifically for dowries. Some families saved up for years to afford a pair stitched with gold thread or dyed using rare indigo. Slippers weren't just given, they were invested in. Some even had miniature poems embroidered along the arch, couplets passed from mother to daughter like genetic code. And your fringe tidbit, some slipper pairs were intentionally mismatched, embroidered differently on each foot to symbolize the unpredictable journey of marriage. 2 steps, 1 path, they said. Or, as one embroidered verse cheekily noted, left foot argues, right foot forgives. Zara holds up a pair now, ivory silk with a thin ankle strap. These, she says, hair for my wedding night. Then she smirks. Only to wear when I want him to listen. You try not to laugh, but you also notice her hands linger on the strap longer than necessary. There's something heavy in the gesture. Hope, maybe. Or fear. Slippers, after all, are private. They see parts of you that others don't. They carry your weight, your hesitation, your joy. She opens a smaller box and pulls out a pair even older, leather, stitched with pale thread worn thin. My grandmother's. She wore them until she couldn't walk. The stitching's uneven. One sole is patched with linen, but they're kept as delicately as the gold bracelet tucked beneath them. Revered. There's no fanfare. No drama. Just reverence. You help Zahra wrap each pair in linen cloth and stack them in the chest, row by row. The ones with stories, the ones with hopes. Even the ones with doubts. The last pair she places on top, simple, cream-colored, almost plain. These, she says quietly, are for when I visit my mother's grave. You don't say anything, you just nod. And together, you close the chest. The latch clicks shut with the finality of something precious tucked away until the next chapter begins. And as you stand, your own slippers, soft, familiar, broken in, feel heavier than before. Because now you know every scuff is a memory, every crease is a heartbeat, and sometimes the most sacred heirlooms come with toe scuffs. The morning fog rolls in soft and low, like a shawl draped across the city's shoulders. You pull your cloak tighter and step onto the stone path leading toward the communal bathhouse. This place, unlike the orderly courtyard or the royal chamber, is chaos. Beautiful, fragrant, wet chaos. Steam curls through the carved archways like lazy serpents. The scent of eucalyptus, soap, and boiled water fills your lungs. And there, already milling about the entryway, is the slipper lineup. This is it. The war zone. Communal bathhouses, hammams, are where etiquette breaks down, or more accurately, where etiquette goes rogue. Rules still apply, but they're more fluid, because in here, people shed more than clothing. They shed class. Hierarchies get steamed away, and slippers. Oh, they go missing faster than gossip during a shave. You remove your own pair, your beloved green velvets, and place them neatly near the threshold. There's a rack, sort of, but most people just pile theirs in a corner and trust fate. Foolish optimism. A bathhouse attendant, thin as a bamboo stalk, and with a voice like old parchment, hands you a communal pear flat. Basic, rubber-soled. Functional, soulless. These are for walking between hot rooms. And most importantly, waterproof. Your soft house slippers would be soup in minutes. Now comes the dance of identification. One mainstream fact: most bathhouses offered token tags or colored ties to help guests identify their slippers afterward. But let's be honest, those tags got wet, faded, or were outright ignored. By the time steam fogged up the entrance room, slipper theft, accidental or otherwise, was rampant. You enter the first chamber. Warm, fragrant, echoing with water, dripping in muted voices. And you begin to hear the complaints. These aren't mine. Who took my left foot? I had peacock feathers on mine, and now I've got this peasant nonsense. Yes, even here, in a room where everyone is half naked and half, boiled status clings to slippers like stubborn soap scum. You shuffle toward a hot stone slab where 3 women are already lounging. Their feet are bare now, but you see their slippers tucked beneath their towels. One pair, bright red, clearly not communal, looks suspiciously like they belong to someone else. You glance at the owner. She stares straight ahead, as if slippers materialized on their own like divine favors. And here's your fringe tidbit. In some cities, people began sewing tiny bells into their bathhouse slippers, not for fashion, but as a low, fi-ante theft alarm. If you heard jingle when someone walked out, you'd know your pair had been swiped. You pass through the steam chamber, the domed ceiling dripping faintly as warm air curls around you. Water sluices down stone basins, and a boy with a large brass bowl is tossing eucalyptus, scented water over a guest's shoulders. You soak. You sweat. You feel reborn. And then, you go back to the slippers. The return ritual is always dramatic. Everyone emerges at once, dripping towel, wrapped, blinking like owls. You find your original pair has migrated several feet from where you left it. One slipper is on its side. The other has a smudge near the toe. You pick them up cautiously, sniff them, just in case, and glance around. A few guests eye you suspiciously. Is it yours? Are you sure? In an older part of town, a noblewoman once hired a servant just to guard her bath slippers. The woman refused to enter without her. Defender of the heel. Ridiculous, maybe. But also kind of genius. And yes, historians still argue whether bathhouse slipper etiquette was ever codified or just a fever dream of anxious guests. Some sources suggest engraved tiles were used to assign slipper spots. Others claim it was a free for all and everyone just got used to the chaos. You slide your feet into your green pair. They're damp now, a little wrinkled, but familiar yours. Probably. Close enough. And that's the thing about slippers in public spaces. They aren't just about comfort or politeness. They're about claiming a little piece of your identity in a room that wants to make everyone equal. They're your signature, your statement, your armor, however soft. As you leave the bathhouse, someone rushes past you. You hear a shout behind them. "That's my pair!" The accused doesn't stop, just disappears around the corner, slippers slapping rhythmically against wet stone. You sigh. Classic. You reach down, adjust your pair one last time, and walk slowly home, the fog lifting just enough to let the sun peek through. And your slippers worn and damp, and still holding on to that faint note of eucalyptus, carry you forward. Quiet, sure, unmistakably yours. Later that evening, you find yourself in a room glowing with candlelight and perfume. Not the somber hush of the harem, or the clean quiet of a mosque, but a space that pulses softly with intrigue. Laughter trickles like spilled wine, silk rustles in slow movements. And yes, slippers, more ornate, more revealing, and far more dangerous, lie in careful disarray near every cushion. You've entered a poetry salon. But this isn't just about sonnets and stewed apricots. This is about flirtation, veiled suggestions, and feet you weren't prepared for the slippers to be this seductive. You settle onto a cushion near a low brass tray of sugared rose petals, trying not to stare, but it's impossible. One woman across the room, reclining with feline confidence, wears slippers embroidered with tiny tulips. The left is slightly looser than the right, and when she crosses her legs, slowly, you glimpse the embroidered line on the arch. My steps forget, but my soul remembers. A quote from a 12th century love poem. And suddenly, your pulse decides it has a sense of drama. In Persian salons, slippers became part of a language spoken only between glances and verses. You couldn't overtly flirt, at least not without consequences. But a slipper could betray all kinds of affection. A toe pointed toward someone was an invitation. 2 feet crossed away, but one slipper tilted back toward a certain guest. Scandalous, subtle. Here's your mainstream fact. During the Safavid and early Qajar eras, salons were often hosted by widows or unmarried women of wealth who maintained control over their homes and reputations through meticulous etiquette, including footwear. They encouraged poetic expression, sure, but also curated the guest list with the precision of a court official. You didn't just show up. You were summoned, and your slippers were noticed before your voice ever joined a verse. A young man near you recites a verse with a trembling voice. Her heels wrote verses on the tile, and my heart tripped after the rhyme. The room exhales. The host smiles. The woman in tulip slippers hides a smirk behind her cup. Now here's your fringe tidbit. A brief fashion emerged in the 18th century for flirtation slippers. Designed with ankle straps that could be subtly loosened, the wearer might accidentally slip out of one during a particularly intense couplet, revealing a glimpse of ankle or embroidered inner sole. It was the Persian equivalent of a romantic wink. Several prominent poets mentioned the motif. One wrote, "She left her slipper behind. I returned it. She never wore it again." Devastating. Meanwhile, the men's slippers tonight are restrained. Deep indigo sand, colored suede, burgundy brocade, but no less charged. One guest near the corner has removed his pair entirely, leaving them angled deliberately beside the host's own. It's not just about comfort, it's a layered message. I am here. I am unarmed. I trust you. You begin to realize that slippers are performing their own silent play beneath every conversation. When someone excuses themselves, they place their pair carefully, pointed toward a specific person. A coded farewell. When someone lingers too long, their slipper positioning shifts subtly. Interest, or a signal they want their poetry returned. And of course, missteps happen. There's a collective shift in the room as a man retrieves the wrong pair of slippers. Not by accident. He lifts the pair worn by a woman who recited a love poem earlier, slips his foot into one, and meets her eyes. She blushes. The host frowns. It's a move, a bold one. Historians still argue whether this kind of flirtation was ever approved or merely tolerated with a wink. Some texts refer to salon rules as elastic silk, always present, always flexible, and very capable of snapping. One scholar wrote, "When words fail, let your feet speak, but choose the slipper wisely, lest your heart be exiled in velvet." As the evening winds down, you're handed a scroll with a handwritten poem, unsigned. You glance around, but no one is looking directly at you. Then you notice a pair of slippers across the room, new ones, scarlet with a thin braid of gold. They weren't here earlier? Their toes point, yes, definitely, toward your cushion. You don't move. You don't smile. But you place your own pair gently, deliberately, so the toes touch the tips of the scarlet ones. Just for a moment. Just long enough to say noted. And then you stand, slip into your own, and walk out. You may never know who sent the poem. But your slippers will remember. The sun has long dipped below the rooftops, and the city settles into its nighttime hum, the low, vibrating buzz of lives folding into dreams. But your evening isn't quite over. You've been invited, reluctantly, perhaps curiously, to an estate owned by a European collector, a man who fancies himself a cultural enthusiast. He claims to adore Persian design. You brace yourself. The house is enormous. Columns, terraces, imported marble, everything. But something feels off. The doormat is wrong. The entryway is cluttered. And at the door, a small wooden sign reads, "Shoes optional. Slippers encouraged. Optional." Your inner slipper guardian tightens her shawl in disapproval. You step inside and nearly trip over a heap of mismatched footwear. Boots, patent leather monstrosities, floral things that resemble angry garden gnomes. And there, off to one side, is a display labeled "Authentic Persian Slippers, 18th-19th Century." You approach. Oh no. The glass case contains several battered pairs, half of them European hybrids. One, laughably, has a rigid wooden sole nailed to a velvet upper, utterly unwalkable. Another features a bizarre combination of Persian toe, curl, and French Rococo heel, creating what can only be described as a footwear identity crisis. Here's your mainstream fact. During the height of European colonial enthusiasm for the Orient, designers in France, England, and Italy began incorporating exotic elements into their clothing and decor, slippers included. They took the curled toe, the embroidery, the silk, and jammed them onto hard indoor clogs. The result, pretty unwearable, not even remotely Persian in spirit, but they sold. And more importantly, they rewrote the narrative. Historians still argue whether the West's reinterpretation of Persian slipper style was ignorance, admiration, or something more insidious. What's clear is that the form got copied without the function, the symbolism discarded in favor of pure aesthetic. All silk, no sole. You overhear the collector describing one of his favorite pieces. He says, "This one was worn by a Sufi mystic during a ceremonial trance." You squint at the label. It's a Venetian slipper from 1820. Not even close. The poor thing never saw a mystic, just a particularly damp masquerade. One guest leans over to whisper, "I think he wears them sometimes for parties." You shudder. Here's your fringe tidbit. One particularly determined British aristocrat once tried importing Persian slipper customs into his estate. He issued guest slippers embroidered with the family crest and insisted all visitors remove their shoes upon entry. It lasted 2 weeks. Then someone wore hunting boots into the library, and the whole endeavor was scrapped as unreasonably foreign. You're handed a glass of something vaguely floral. Your host, brimming with pride, beckons you to a salon room where more guests have gathered for tribute to Eastern leisure. You suppress a sigh and scan the floor. No one's removed their shoes. The carpet, Persian, authentic, stunning, is suffering. A woman seated across the room adjusts her feet. She's wearing a pair of fox velvet mules sold at a high-end boutique in Paris. They're labeled as inspired by Persian palace wear. But they have a zipper. A zipper. You wonder what Shah Abbas would have thought. And yet, despite the absurdity, there's something fascinating. These misinterpretations, awkward as they are, show just how powerful the slipper is. It traveled. It transformed. It was misunderstood, yes, but it endured. You excuse yourself politely and head toward a quieter corridor. To your left, a door is slightly ajar. A storage room, maybe. Inside, on a forgotten shelf, you spot something different. An old, dusty pair of real Persian slippers. Faded green, frayed at the heel, with the faintest shimmer of once gold thread. You pick one up. It fits. No embroidery declaring status. No toe curl for drama. Just fabric molded by 1,000 steps. Honest, simple, undeniably real. You leave your own pair beside it. A quiet offering. A nod to what was and what could still be remembered. And then you walk out, soft-footed, slipperless, and suddenly lighter. Let the glass cases keep their fantasies. You know the truth. You're on a rooftop now, high above the city, where the breeze is cool and the stars have finally come out to gossip. The tiles beneath your feet are smooth, faintly dusty, and lit in silver by the moon. And yes, you're barefoot. Your slippers rest beside you, gently folded against each other, as if napping after a very long day. You've walked through mosques, harem halls, bustling markets, and awkward colonial drawing rooms. You've learned how a footstep becomes a message, how a pair of slippers can cradle status, sorrow seduction, and occasionally political sabotage, and yet the modern ones still exist. Fox velvet sold in gift shops, plastic soled hybrids that claim Persian heritage, with a vaguely paisley pattern slapped on top. Slippers with memory foam, scented with lavender, manufactured by a company called Sultan Feet, Lentid. In a factory nowhere near Isfahan. You slide your finger along the hem of your green pair. They've dulled a bit, picked up some extra creases, but they still feel alive, molded to your exact existence. They've remembered you, step by step. Modern revivals of Persian slipper style come and go. Every few years, some fashion blog rediscovers curled toes and filigree. There's a brief explosion of velvet mules on runways. Instagram influencers pose with Fox historical captions. One designer even launches a nomadic line of slippers made from vegan leather and desert sand. Yes, actual sand. It's not practical. Still, among the noise, there are echoes of truth. One mainstream fact, traditional Persian slipper design has quietly persisted in small villages and heritage workshops. While fashion cycles spin and mutate, these slippers continue to be stitched by hand, sometimes by old women whose mothers taught them the craft using patterns memorized, not printed. They may not have websites, but they have stories. In Shiraz, a grandmother embroiders slippers for each grandchild's birthday. In Yazid, a quiet cobbler still uses pomegranate dye for red tones, refusing to switch to synthetic colors because they smell wrong. In Tehran, a shop tucked behind a bookstore sells slippers wrapped in wax paper with handwritten tags for quiet mornings only. Your fringed tidbit for the finale. In one corner of Tabriz, an artist started sculpting miniature ceramic slippers and hiding them in public spaces, at bus stops and trees, behind museum plaques. Each tiny slipper carries a line of poetry. A project called Souls of the City. Locals consider it good luck to find one. No one's sure who started it, but the artist's identity is rumored to be a retired librarian with exceptional taste in tea. And maybe that's the beauty of it. Persian slippers aren't gone. They've just shifted forms. Sometimes ceremonial, sometimes absurd. But always about the threshold. The step between silence and conversation. Between outer world and inner stillness. You slip your feet back into your own pair one final time. They hug you like old friends. No embroidery needed. No curled toe necessary. Just fabric and memory, stitched with quiet dignity. You walk slowly down the rooftop stairs, past doorways, across tile, each step soft, each sound fading. The house is asleep now. You reach your room, slide your slippers off and place them side by side, toes pointing toward tomorrow. You lie down. The city exhales, and in the corner your slippers rest, keepers of history, guardians of quiet goodbyes. Let it all fade now, the tiled halls, the velvet stitches, the whispered rules and careful steps. Let the memory of saffron, scented courtyards slip gently from your mind, like a pair of slippers taken off at the door. There's no need to remember every pattern or custom. Just feel the softness of the past settling around you, comforting and quiet. You've wandered far, through bizarre noise and marble echo, through gossip, laughter, and the subtle weight of tradition worn on your feet. Close your eyes. Let your thoughts move as slowly as a servant, turning a pair of slippers to face the right direction. No rush. No sound. Just the faint hush of old fabric folding in on itself. Breathe in. Rosewater and dust. Breathe out. Silence and memory. Even now, somewhere in the world, someone is walking barefoot into a room and glancing down at a worn pair by the wall. Someone is choosing between silk and felt. Someone is placing their slippers side by side, not because they must, but because it feels right. Let that be enough. The history will wait. The etiquette will fade like footprints in a courtyard breeze. But for now, you're still and safe and almost asleep. Good night.